standing next to probably our best yielding corn this year, Brian, or our corn field where our best yielding corn came from. And you think about it, we had some good yields. We also had some disappointing yields this year. And what was it about 2010?
Well, it was that way all across the country. And we planted some early corn. We planted from 83-day corn all the way up to 103-day corn. We actually had some of the early numbers that yielded really well, so I can't just say it was all the later numbers. I can't just say it was early planting. Certainly that had something to do with it. I mean, the later corns on average yielded a little bit better, and the early planting yielded a little bit better, but we had a lot of issues all across the country. And so we wanted to talk about some of those things today. And, you know, what are we going to do for adjustment going into next year? Because we can't change what happened this year. We just have to look ahead and say, let's try to improve yield going forward.
Okay, well, here's one thing that I like. You know, a lot of the things that we did right in 2009, we thought, well, we'll do those again in 2010, and they didn't work out for us as well.
Like what?
Well, okay, let's just start with the weather to begin with. Last year,
we manipulated the weather last year?
No. In 2009, there was a general reaction around the country that, wow, we're planting too late maturing corns. We need earlier day corns because they're just not making it. The corn was too wet in the fall, so a lot of guys shifted a few days earlier. And you know what? This year, the later day stuff was a little bit better than the earlier day stuff.
This year, we had the driest corn that we've ever had. We finished corn harvest October 20th. I mean, usually it's a struggle to finish by the end of October. We've never finished even close to this early before. So yeah, we had tremendous dry down. We're just not used to that. Fortunately, we spread out the risk, and that's one thing we always encourage everyone to do. Plant some early stuff, but also plant some later stuff too, because you don't know what the year's going to bring.
That's exactly right. Knowing what the year is going to bring. And this year, you know, normally the excuse for farmers is, well, we just could have had a little bit more rain. We would have had it made. Well, I don't know if we've ever had a year that we've had more rain than this one.
Well, yeah, but it wasn't necessarily timely rain, and it wasn't the right amount. So what we would like, well, I'm just saying what we would like to have.
You want a tenth of an inch every other day?
I'd like to have maybe half an inch or 3/4 of an inch twice a week. That's what I want. Is that too much to ask? But no, we'd get 4 inches in one shot, and then we'd go for a little while without. So sometimes we would have crops that were suffering, even in tiled fields around the country. You go to areas that are fully tiled, like let's say in Illinois or Iowa. Well, if the rivers are plumb full, where's the water going to go out of the tile? It just can't get away. So sometimes too much rain is not a good thing.
Well, definitely wet feet hurt this year's crop more than anything. I think you look at the elevation in certain fields and you could see it as you move down just a couple of feet in elevation, the yields just plummeted. And many farmers that I rode in the combine with this year would notice on the yield monitor, wow, we've got 230, 250 bushel corn. This is fantastic. And we go down just a couple of feet in elevation and it dropped down to 130 bushel
And that's why going forward, a lot of people are investing a large amount of money in drain tile, improving that drainage in fields. And sure, this isn't going to happen every year, but the years it does happen, you gain so much in yield when that tile is in the ground and it's done right. It's a big deal.
Well, it's controlling the water table, and if you can keep that water table down far enough away from the roots so your crop doesn't have wet feet, it makes a big difference. Now, not just in yield, but in disease tolerance. That was a real big thing this year. We had some new things like Goss's wilt was moving further into this area.
Okay, let's talk about that specifically. Goss's wilt, the problem with it is it's a bacterial disease. So in other words, it's not a fungus.
Well, you can't spray headline on it. You can't spray headline to prevent Goss's wilt.
So how do you stop Goss's wilt?
Well, you've got to be smart. Before you even know you have a problem, you have to plant the right hybrid. That's one of the big things. There are hybrids that have great tolerance to Goss's wilt, and there's some that are very susceptible, and that's where a huge difference was.
But here's the big question. It's just like last year, the corn was really wet, and so you think, oh, it might be wet again next year, and it's super dry. Well, this year we had Goss's wilt for the first time ever on our own farm, and so you start picking varieties that are more Goss's wilt tolerant. I'm just going to guess that maybe next year we won't have as much Goss's wilt, and the non-Goss's wilt tolerant varieties might yield better. Who knows?
All right, let's look at it this way though. Let's take sclerotinia white mold in our soybeans. We don't have that every year.
Yeah, but that's
once you have the seed for that out in a field, whenever you get the right weather conditions, you're going to get it back. Goss's wilt is the same thing. Once you've had it, now that bacteria is out there in your fields, you just have to be prepared for it. It may only strike 1 out of 10 years, who knows? But there's some parts of the country it comes every single year. That just has to be one of the factors when you're picking hybrids that you say, you know what, I got to look at the Goss's tolerance and I may not need it, but if there's 3 hybrids and they all yield about the same, I'm picking the one that has Goss's tolerance.
Yep, another big thing is in terms of fertility. So if you go back in the fall of 2008, a lot lot of farmers just skipped fertility because it was too expensive. Last fall, a lot of people loaded up because fertilizer got cheap again, and they said, oh, I better make up for the prior year. So we had a lot of cornfields out there that had a tremendous amount of fertilizer, and you know what? In a lot of those fields, it turned out pretty good in terms of yield.
Well, there's a big surprise. If you've got plenty of plant food in a field, the plants are going to eat that plant food, and you're going to have better crops, and that made a huge difference for us this year.
Yeah, so don't get me wrong, I'm not saying to way overdo it and, you know, pollute the environment or anything like that, but what I am saying is we've got fertilizer costs that are rising quite a bit here this fall, and the temptation is to say, well, even though I'm going to get $4.50 for my corn for 2011, I don't know if I really want to spend so much money on fertilizer. We're just trying to tell you, if you want to cut back a little bit, fine, whatever, but don't skip it entirely. Make sure you're putting some plant food out there because your plant's got to eat if it's going to grow big and healthy and produce a lot of grain.
Okay, before we get done with corn talk though, let's talk a little bit about bugs, because corn rootworms are something that, you know, we've got the new Smart Stacks trait, we've got VT3 hybrids, we've got Herculex, we've got all these things out there to prevent rootworm damage on our crop. Well, all those are BT traits, and the rootworms have to actually feed on the roots to get that protein in them in order for them to be controlled. Insecticide, is that coming back into play? What's the difference here with corn hybrids?
Well, some people are using more insecticide. We use insecticide at a relatively low rate on all our acres on our farm, whether it's Smart Stacks, VT3, or non-traded or non-rootworm corn. We are using some insecticide. We'll use the full rate where we have the non-rootworm corn and a reduced rate elsewhere.
Even when we're using these traits though, that's the big thing. A lot of guys think, well, okay, it's one or the other. No, not necessarily. I think you do need the trait, but I also think you need to supplement that with some insecticide.
Well, you might. If you're in a low pressure area, then it's probably not a real big deal. Where we're at, it's a high pressure area. We have a tremendous amount of rootworms because a lot of farmers around here raise nothing but corn. So it's just a little different situation. So we just want to make sure that you're aware. If you've got heavy pressure, the trait may not be enough. Now, the last question I guess I'd ask you, what do you think of the Smart Stacks yield in terms of VT3 corn yield?
Well, you know,
because Monsanto's been talking a lot about that.
Yeah, this is something that's pretty interesting too. And I think when you have a new trait, there's always the temptation to say, well, it's the trait that's doing so much better than everything else, or it's the trait that's doing worse than everything else. I disagree with that. You've got the base germplasm that's going to go in with that trait. And if you've got the wrong germplasm, like this year, let's take Smart Stacks for example. In our area, we'd never seen Gauss's wilt before, and all of a sudden we've got it bad. Well, it just happened that a number of the Smart Stacks hybrids, well, it wasn't that it had the trait, but it was susceptible to Gauss's wilt, and all of a sudden, wham, they got hit a lot worse than some of the others. And there's a temptation to say, well, Smart Stacks didn't work. You know what? In some cases, it probably didn't. They had the wrong germplasm in a Smart Stacks trait, and it just didn't work. And I know that was proven. There was a 110 or 12-day hybrid that had a lot of problems in Illinois and eastern Iowa. That's fine. But you can't just lump in, oh, the trait is always wrong. The trait's a great trait.
Well, yeah, go back to when Roundup Ready soybeans first came out. Some of those Roundup Ready beans, when they first came out, they didn't yield real good either.
Well,
so
everybody wants to get the trait out, and sometimes they
That's
rush to market with some germplasm that should have been
So all we're
tested
trying to
more.
say is we don't really believe the trait is that bad. It's probably just fine. It's just once they get it in more genetics, I think you'll see that the Smart Stacks will yield well compared to the VT3.
But you know, it's like anything else, Brian. We always say if there's something new, try it in a small quantity and look at it a little bit on your farm, spread your risk out. Don't ever switch the whole farm to something all brand new. It's just too risky when you're talking about your income that's out in those fields.
Well, the only thing that you want to do 100% every year, even in year one, is if a new weed shows up, like our Weed of the Week. We'll tell you how to control it coming up later in the show.